everybody, happy new year. I know it's been months since I last posted a video on the channel, at least a long form one. I've been posting a few short form ones. I hope you've been well. I'm really sorry for such a long pause, but it's with good reason, and this video is going to be one of the reasons why I took such a long break. This video is going to be an explanation of it, so I hope either way it's going to be very helpful. It's on production. So I had gotten a bulk order last year, and it came with its challenges, and it came with all sorts of things that I had to do that needed my concentration. And despite all the challenges, I managed to finish the work, and I wanted to just share, based on my experience, on what to do when you are processing a bulk order and you don't necessarily have a big team to process the order. Big team meaning that you don't have a big factory, or you don't have so many tailors that you need to process this work. So for me, I outsourced my work, so I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to talk about the preparation, especially, probably the most important, the planning and preparation, and especially if a client gives you a very short timeline to fulfill the order, what to do. So for me, you know, sometimes when you're working with clients, you need to understand that not everyone is a producer of clothes, or some people want something and they think the time they've given you is sufficient. So it's important to know that when you're dealing with your clients. So in this video, I'm going to explain all that. Welcome. So the gist of the order, basically it was an order for costumes for a cultural day for a school. So I didn't necessarily get the order for the whole school. We were about 3 designers who had been contracted. I basically got an email and that asked me to share my portfolio. I shared my portfolio, and then basically you're called for a meeting, and then you discuss those things. So the costumes, I think I'm going to just share the ones I did, and basically explain a bit more with the pictures so that it actually makes more sense. The pictures, inspiration, how I did my the measurements, how I did the pricing and the charts and everything. It's very technical, and sometimes if you've never done a ready-to-wear collection, or you've never done bulk production, it can be very overwhelming, because you need to know quantities of fabric, which comes with experience. It's not something that everybody really knows. For me, because I've been in the industry for very many years, I can be able to look at somebody and know how many meters of fabric they need. So some of the clothes really needed a lot of fabric. You need to be able to figure that out. Of course, you need to meet the client, which were children, and you make the clothes. So for me, the classes I was assigned to were more of older kids, which for me was fine because I'm used to making kids adult clothes, and a lot of the older kids, generally their body sizes fall within body sizes for older people than for kids. There's a designer who dealt with more of the younger kids. She's used to doing that, and then the other designer took whatever was left. So I will share it with the content so that it makes more sense, because it will make sense if I'm just talking, you don't understand the context. And also feel free to use these templates and modify them. Make sure that when you get an order like this, that you actually have inspiration pictures. The school provided the inspiration pictures for what they wanted. Make sure you're able to break it down if you're going to outsource your production, and ensure that the people who are helping with the work really understand what you need to do. And you really have to break down the costumes, because like if you're doing a costume that has a hair accessory, you need to figure out if you are going to do the hair accessory, if it will be bought. If you can't provide that hair accessory, maybe because it's not available in the country, things like that. So let me share it in slide form so that it makes more sense, and I will see you at the end of the video. So we are going to start with the context of order. It started with an email from the client, and the email was basically informing me that they would want me to submit my portfolio for the theme they have for Culture Day. And I submitted my portfolio, and I was called for a meeting. I went for a meeting. And then when we went for a meeting, we were given a brief, because we were a couple of designers, were given a brief of what is expected. From what we understand, each class had a theme. So they had inspiration pictures from the internet of something close to what they wanted. We made necessary changes and alterations. Some costumes were completely changed. And then we created the final design concept of what we would settle in. After that, I took time and went to get quotes of all the materials I decided I was going to use for the costumes. Because it's a school and it's something the children will probably only wear once, there was no need to really go for very, very expensive materials. So I went for the most affordable that would still look good. I got quotations of the materials, did my math. I created quotations for the school and then sent it. And then once they approved, I basically sent an invoice with my payment terms. I would suggest that your payment terms should always be 70% of the total cost. Remember that there's a lot of costs, which I will explain later. And once you've done that, then you can send them the invoice, and the people tend to pay either directly to your bank, either a check or transfer, or through mobile money. And you can also send money from mobile money to the bank, so whichever it is. So it's always good to just make sure you document every single thing. Make sure you document all the amounts, make sure you keep all the receipts, and make sure you keep tabs on all your costs, because it can really add up. So you can see, like for the Mexico costume for boys, it was like mariachi band. So there was the jacket, the trouser, the sash, the bow tie, the white shirt, and the hat. The hat we ended up not doing because it's not available in Kenya, and it wasn't going to be very practical to make. So that was the concept of the Mexico costume. For the girls, there was a white off-shoulder dress, basically like a gypsy dress with some print trim on it. So I went for a floral trim, which you'll see eventually. And then we had a red sash, which we also gave the girls. And then there was also a hair piece that we had to source for. You could either make it or buy it. So yeah, that was what the girls had for their costumes for Mexico. The Mijikenda costume was really for very small girls, so I opted for a strappy dress that had the Mijikenda tribe. Basically, they actually wore like sisal skirts at the bottom or some very freely bottom, but I wanted it to be practical, so I did a gathered skirt out of tulle and organza and the top. So it's something that the girls will be able to wear again. We did away with the jewelry part, and we just did the sashes because the girls were really from a younger class. For the boys, we had the Mijikenda outfit that generally comprises of them wearing a t-shirt and they wrap around a kikoi. So instead of wrapping a kikoi, I decided to opt to give the boys shorts because it was more practical and something they could wear again. So we did drawstring shorts and the hat and the t-shirt. And because they're also very young boys, I felt like this would be more practical and it would be a costume they would be able to wear again outside of this culture day. And the last costume I'll feature is the Oromo girls. This one was very complex because it comes, the Oromo tribe is from Ethiopia, and there's a very light linen that they use for the costume. So I had to use my wisdom to figure out which is the best fabric to use to do this, because the linen fabric is very pricey. It is about 4,000 shillings per meter, which would be about $30. And of course I needed a lot of meters because the fabric itself that's sold here is not even the same and the width is small, so there was no way. So I did manage to make the costume with a fabric that I found at work, which I'll show you eventually. Yeah, but it had a lot of detail, the sleeves, the trims and everything like that. And there was a headpiece I also made for this costume. So those are the examples that I decided to show you because those are the ones I actually have pictures of for my complete work as well. Once everything was set and we had agreed with the school about basically how the work was going to go, the workflow, from the time we take measurements, the time we're supposed to deliver, do fittings and everything like that, we scheduled measurements. So I went to the school, and the sheet you're seeing is basically what I use. I tailor-made each sheet according to the costume. So for example, the Mexico costume, because there is like a round shoulder measurement, I made sure I included that. Basically I just did it like that. It was easier for me. And for the boys as well, because a lot of the boys costumes had different elements, because there's usually a trouser or a short, and there's a shirt or there's a jacket, like there are different elements. So I had to have a sheet. And then of course my assistant that I went with, we tag teamed in measuring and writing down the measurements. Definitely you have to write the name of the child and you have to write the age, because the way the thing was being done is that each parent was going to pay for the child. The school wasn't going to pay, the parent was going to pay. So you have to indicate and make the costume according to the child whose parent have paid. It's not always like that with all schools, but that's how this school was choosing to do it. Then there was the shopping. So there was a shopping list I had to come up with. You really have to break it down. Here is an example of what shopping looked like. So basically, like for the Mijikenda boys, where you break down the things you need to buy and the quantities. So I broke it down to each child, and then I calculated the cost for each child, and I multiplied it by the number of children that I was going to make the costumes for. So the children were many, so you multiply it and all that, but it was very important to have the unit cost. This is just an example. This is an example of how basically you do a unit cost for one child and then you multiply it for other kids. So if they are 10, you do everything by 10. If you're buying 10 kikois, you'd buy 10 kikois times 700, like that. So I had to do it like this because unfortunately not every parent cooperated, which is why I don't like the method of relying on parents to pay, especially if a school knows that there's a culture day and kids are supposed to do this every year. It's better to work with the school, but it is what it is. I think the school also doesn't want to have the burden of following up with parents all the time. So this is how I did my cost, and this was very important for shopping. This was basically my way of basically trying to write down my shopping list when I break down every costume. So I decided to show you the Mijikenda one because it's only probably the least elements for what I needed to make sure I have put down. This one doesn't even cover the transport cost and everything like that. This was mostly for the costume cost. After the shopping, then there is the work distribution, making sure you schedule finishings. Now, when you're scheduling finishings, you have to think about how you're going to finish the garment, elements that need to be done. So there are some elements of the outfits that I couldn't delegate to a tailor because not a lot of tailors are very good at detail work. So if there were motifs to be sewn or trimmings to be added and things like that, you'll find that I would have to do that, or if I had another designer to do the work, that's a person who would do it, and that's another cost. And then of course you have to schedule fittings for the children, you have to schedule alterations, and then you have to schedule final delivery. These are the costs to consider. This is just a very brief list. So there's transport and logistics. This includes your shopping, which you might actually find out it's more than one trip because of the bulk, and also depending on where you're shopping, not everything is usually in one place. So you might find that you have to make several trips. Going to the client is also a cost. Delivery is also a cost. So the number of trips you go to see people that you need to go see, just know that that's a cost in your overall math. The sewing, accessories, and the materials and the trims. Sometimes you can really forget the trims, which is why I was showing you the breakdown with the Mijikenda. You really need to know exactly what you are going to do so that you can really make sure you note and write down everything. So the patterns. Patterns is something people might not always think about because a lot of people use freehand. So depending on the method you're using to cut your clothes, Patterns could be a cost, or if you're doing freehand is also a cost because there's a labor for cutting, sewing, and finishing. Packaging is also a cost. I have to buy bags for each and every student. Alterations could also be a cost, especially because it links also with transport, and also depending on the type of alterations that you need. There's also usually sampling as a cost. It really depends on how you decide to negotiate with whoever you're working with, especially if it's a factory. When working with a team, so this is one of those tasks that I definitely saw the need of having an assistant, because it's not just about the production of the actual clothes, but also the other things you need to do, like taking measurements, going shopping, and things like that, and even breaking down the work. It's very, very important to have a team. So either way, apart from that, when you're working with tailors, like I do, you need to understand their skill level. Not every outfit will be made by the same person, so you have to know the skill level, you have to know their speed as well, and then you delegate the work accordingly, and you agree on timelines, and you agree on payment terms. So what I usually do, because I don't necessarily employ tailors, I work with them depending on the type of work I get, is that I have to make sure they can be able to do it with minimal supervision. And another thing I did is that I decided to do all the cutting of the clothes that I was giving tailors, and I was working with tailors who could do the more complex work, because I've worked with them before. So for some of the standardized work, I gave to a factory. So standardized work means if it's a shirt, if it's a trouser, especially a lot of the boys' clothes, that's how they were. I gave it to a factory because I knew I didn't have to explain too much about how I wanted the outfits to be made, and they were going to be able to do it very fast. So I made sure that I had already identified the factory. Do not give work to a factory that you have not identified already. It's not something you start doing when you have just gotten the order. Always know who you are going to work with in advance, especially if you plan on working on bulk orders. Then you have to check their timelines and their work. You can start with samples even for yourself just to see how they work. And also factories tend to specialize in specific fabrics and specific clothes, so you also have to know that in advance. And then you also have to check if they do only standardized patterns, or they also do custom orders. So for this specific factory I work with, they do both. I guess because of Kenya and the demands, they also do custom orders. So also check, a lot of small batch manufacturers or small factories actually have their own fashion lines. That's also a way of checking the kind of work they do, but also make sure that you've protected the work that you give them so that they don't infringe on your copyright. So here is an example of the mariachi costume, basically the Mexico costume for the boys. So for the factory, this is what I gave them to do, because as I said, for the boys it's more standardized. It was 3 pieces, so there was the jacket, the shirt, and the trouser. The bow tie and the sash I handled myself. So these are the measurements I gave them specifically for the bolero, and you have to write a description. If you can't be there in person and you have to delegate it and just send it, you have to write a description. If you can be there in person, it's always better, whether or not it is you or your assistant. So I wanted the jacket, because this specifically one was for the jacket, to have trim on the collar, on the hem of the sleeve, and on the button stand of the jacket. And yeah, so it's also like a crop jacket, it's not a full jacket, so the way I took the measurements also reflected that. So that was I sent an inspiration and also a sketch. I just got the sketch from the internet, but because I was there to explain, it was easy for the workshop manager to follow. You have to be very, very careful when you're giving details, because at some point the workshop manager thought I wanted shoulder pads, and I told him these are kids, they don't need shoulder pads. So you have to be there so that you can be able to explain the details, and you really, really have to know your stuff. These are not things you guess. And because it's a factory and they were making multiple, you need to make sure even the material you've bought is enough and it's a kind of material they work with. Then I also broke down the trouser of the boys. As you can see from the sketch, it's a very simple trouser, elasticated at the back and straight at the front. And I gave the measurements for the trousers. People take different measurements for clothes, and usually I try to just be as detailed as possible because I really hate it when I'm called to clarify things. So I'd rather be over detailed than under detailed. Then there is a shirt. As you can see, it was a short sleeve shirt because I consider that the jacket has long sleeves, so I figured a short sleeve shirt would do. And it has a button stand, collar and pocket. So you can see there is a bow tie and a sash. Those ones I handle on my own. And yes, I didn't give the factory that, but the point was that they were going to understand that that element was going to be there because it's a costume. So yeah, that's generally how I gave the work to the factories. This is just one of the examples. So it's time for the reveal. As you can see, I have included the inspo picture, which is the one where you see people wearing, and then the other picture is what I made. So this is the Mijikenda girl. As you can see, it came out really, really well. You can see the tulle inspiration so that the girl can be able to wear it longer, and I decided against the straps, and I decided to just make it a sleeveless dress. Next is the Mijikenda boys, which is basically a Kikoi short t-shirt and hat. I made the hat and the shorts, so the t-shirt I just bought. So basically that was it. After that, we have the Oromo costume. As you can see from the inspiration picture, the girls' dresses are made of very, very light cotton. So I tried as much as possible to keep the element of how the dress looks. But I used a heavier cotton because the light cotton, as I mentioned, was very expensive. But I think I did a pretty decent job in trying to make it look as close as possible to the original. Please note that with the Oromo culture, from my research on the internet, the ribbons can be a diverse number of colors. It doesn't have to be blue like the way it is in the picture. It could also be gold and all that. Like, Ethiopians really celebrate a lot of colors in their outfits. Next, we have the off-shoulder Mexico dress. So the picture I post of my design, I didn't include the sash, but there was a separate sash. I just didn't take a photo of it, and I decided to do a sash of the same print as you can see on the dress. So basically, I managed to replicate. If you really look closely at my dress, you will see the lace details. I just used a thinner lace on my dress. So keeping in mind that these are kids and the inspiration picture is an adult woman. Lastly, we have the Mexico boys, starting with the jacket. As you can see how the trim looked, I also used a very thin trim. Then you could see the shirt with the bow tie. The bow tie was clippable. I made sure it was clippable so that it can also be used as a hair accessory. Then finished off with the trouser with the sash. As you can see, I also included a sash which I actually attached on the trouser waist. So that's it. So I hope that you've learned something and the video has been informative. I haven't really gotten so much into the nitty-gritty of outsourcing production because my next video is going to be about a production checklist. And I had actually filmed this last year. I just didn't have time to edit it, and I think I was just too tired. I took time off of everything towards the end of the year because I was just spent. And of course, I also had the graduation of my students to deal with right after I finished that bulk order. And there's a video that will definitely come up later in the year for how that went, because I had shared that I was teaching women at our church for sewing classes and they graduated. So I'm happy about that, and we're about to start the next class. So either way, that video is going to come up so that you can see what the ladies were up to. So I want to focus a bit more on production this next 2 months. I think I'll try and do videos every 2 weeks. I'll see how that goes. I don't want to promise, but the next video is going to come up almost 2 weeks after this because I had already recorded it, and then I'll continue with the rest because I really want to break down production for ready-to-wear, production for mass production, and the checklist, and yeah, basically things like that. So I just hope it will be helpful. I hope you still check out the whole production playlist. I have a playlist for fashion production in my channel, so definitely check it out. I think it's just important. It has a lot of information, and it's really mostly helpful to people who are in Kenya, but I think you can be able to put it in context of where you come from. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope I'll see you soon in the next one. Bye.